Don't ever try to propagate this plant by leaf cuttings. Hello everyone, my name is Adina from plantsbutbetter, and today we're talking about this beautiful Sansevieria Silver Flame. It's very low maintenance, and if you ignore it, it'll be happy. So what's not to like about that? I would say this plant is a 9 out of 10 on our care meter, and that's why I pretty much recommend it to everyone. Let's talk about light. Although Sansevierias have a reputation of low light plants, I would not advise you to keep it in low light. Low light means slow death for most plants. There is no such thing as low light tolerant plants. Well, maybe I didn't say it right. This can tolerate low light for a short amount of time, but it will definitely not thrive, and it will slowly hit the fan. I noticed when this plant receives a great amount of light that the edges become a bit more yellowish, like they change the color to almost gold. I don't know if that's the case with any silver flame. Maybe I got a different plant. This is, by the way, my personal plant from my collection. But I think the fact that the edges change color is pretty cool. It can definitely tolerate moderate light. However, if your home is very dark, I would recommend some grow lights, not only for this plant but for every plant in your collection. Additional light, it will always be a good choice for your house plants. Moving on to watering. Sansevierias in general don't like excess water, so you can get away with watering maybe once a month during summer and once every 2 months during winter. And yes, you can stretch your watering schedule even to 2 months. So you don't need to water the substrate completely, only a glass of water will do. Bottom watering will also work with this plant, especially in winter, and also to avoid fungus gnats. Make sure the soil is completely dry before you water your plant again. You can simply check it with your finger and you'll know if it's the right time or not. You know what happens when you give this plant too much water? Well, the obvious answer is root rot. And I'm completely traumatized by that. So you may be observing some wrinkles on these leaves, and this is because it lacks a bit of water. I water my Sansevierias a bit less frequently than I should because, again, I'm traumatized by root rot. So yeah, after I'm done with this video, I need to water this plant. So that's a sign right there. If your plant needs water, the leaves will be a bit wrinkly. Moving on to temperature. This plant likes it average. So anything between 20 to 25 degrees Celsius is great. You can definitely go higher, but not lower. Lower temperatures for most plants are causing mushy leaves and rot. And yeah, you basically don't want to be dealing with that. So moving on to humidity. As it's the case with most Sansevierias, this one doesn't need that much humidity. You can keep it in 40 to 50%, that's great. You can go even 60%. There is no need to go higher than that. So this plant is very, very adaptable and it could grow pretty much everywhere. Almost every home is perfect for this plant. It's very, very friendly. Moving on to fertilizing. I fertilize my plants once a month during growing season, and usually in the winter time I stop. That's because winter is usually associated with dormancy, and during dormancy your plants don't really need feeding. I use an NPK of 10-10-10, but if you know your plant is having root problems, like they are not really enough, you can alternate with an NPK of maybe 10-15-10 or 15-30-15, something higher in phosphorus, because phosphorus will promote healthy root growth. Moving on to substrate. So the substrate for your Sansevieria Whitney, oh, I forgot to tell you, you can also call it Sansevieria Whitney, and you could also call it a Dracaena because it's not a Sansevieria technically, but I forgot to tell you that in the beginning. Okay, so the substrate should be very, very lightweight. Sansevierias don't like water, as I've said before, and the great mix for your plant could be some regular potting soil with some perlite and some coco coir. I see I have in my substrate some pine barks as well, like very small pine barks. You can add them, but it's completely optional. You can also use cactus soil. I did that in the past as well. Mix it with some perlite and you're good to go. You can also add a little bit of sand, but not too much, because I find that the sand is actually sogging the soil, and you don't need to exaggerate with that. Please don't use just regular potting soil or peat moss. peat moss, it's too acidic for Sansevierias, and regular potting soil is usually too heavy on the roots. So I would mix it with at least perlite to achieve that drainage. So what about plastic versus terracotta? And as you can see, mine is grown in terracotta. I like to choose it when I'm dealing with smaller pots because I'm usually kind of clumsy and I drop things, and bigger heavy pots are not really my style. So for this one it's actually quite decent. You can also grow them in plastic. It's really up to you. I mean, whatever you prefer. It's not really one better than the other. Moving on to repotting. Sansevieria roots like to be crowded, and that's why you should repot your plant only when it's super necessary. You can do it once every few years when you see massive growth coming out of the pot. Sometimes you can see offsets coming out of the drainage holes. In that case, you really should be repotting this plant. But other than that, if your plant doesn't show any signs of discomfort, just leave it there. Don't bother it. The more you disturb those roots, the more root loss you'll have. And the Sansevieria roots in general, once they are gone, it's way harder for them to recover than, let's say, other plants like aroids or something. And that's because the growth rate on this plant is a bit slower. So that's why I wouldn't recommend to repot this plant like 5 times a year. That's dangerous. But what about propagation? Don't ever try to propagate this plant by leaf cuttings. So I have an example with me right now. As you can see, this plant is grown in leca. I did an experiment and it was actually a leaf cutting of this plant, of Sansevieria Whitney. And as you can see, this looks nothing like the mother plant. Like, this is green and plain simple. This is a regular snake plant. So if you try to propagate this plant by leaf cuttings, you'll end up with regular Sansevieria leaves. So that's why the best type of propagation for this plant is actually by division. So you have to wait until new pops show up and then wait some more for them to be stable enough to be removed from the mother plant, and you have a new plant. Moving on to pests. I would say this plant is very resilient. I didn't have any problems with it. The only problem I could think of is maybe mealybugs or scale or thrips. Yeah, so there can be a few problems. But the best thing you can do is to inspect your plant every time you water it. This is how you'll spot any problem in time, and you can do the right treatments to get rid of any unpleasant surprise. And lastly, let's talk about toxicity. And unfortunately, this plant is not pet friendly, and I would recommend to keep it away from any pet. Like somewhere on a shelf, or you can hang it with some hanging stuff. Or yeah, you know your house better than me, so you know what fits your style. If I missed something, or maybe if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. If you like this channel and you want to support it, you can subscribe or leave a thumbs up or whatever you like. And until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and your plants.